He had heard 1,000 Christmas wishes in his lifetime, some spoken, some written, most small and simple, meant to be forgotten by morning. But he'd never heard a wish like hers. Ethan Harrington did not believe in miracles. He believed in numbers, in stock reports and contracts, in the subtle power of silence across an expensive boardroom table. He was the kind of man who moved through the holidays with practiced detachment, immune to nostalgia and immune, he told himself, to longing. Christmas, for Ethan, was an obligation, an opportunity to be seen donating, to be photographed with ribbons and smiling orphans, to prove that he remembered where he came from, even if he tried his best to forget. The mall was a storm of color and noise that night. Christmas lights blinked in patterns that made the world seem warmer than it was. The air smelled of caramel and pine, and laughter echoed down the polished corridors. Most people saw magic. Ethan saw marketing. He was late, but no one would dare mention it. Not to him. The event was a photo op, another item on his endless December checklist. Shake hands, donate a toy, smile for the cameras. Afterward, he would return to his high-rise apartment, to solitude and a bottle of wine he never finished. But as he moved through the crowd, he heard a voice. Not loud. Not insistent. But so fragile and honest it cut through the carols and chatter. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, stood at the front of the line for Santa Claus. Her coat was too thin, her shoes worn to softness at the toe. She held a faded stuffed rabbit to her chest like a life preserver. When Santa leaned forward, red-suited and jolly, and asked her what she wanted for Christmas, she didn't say a dollhouse or a puppy. She didn't smile. She looked at Santa, eyes too old for her face, and said softly, "I just want my mom back." There was a pause. Not even the elves knew what to say. The children behind her shuffled, unsure, as if some secret rule had been broken. The little girl didn't cry. She didn't look away. She simply waited, as if she knew that wishes rarely found their way to children like her. Ethan froze. For a moment, the noise of the mall faded. He saw her clearly, how she clung to hope not as a wish, but as a habit. The kind of hope that keeps you moving, even when you know better. He should have kept walking. He should have left her story for someone else. But something in the girl's voice, the hollow, echoing ache, unsettled the walls he'd spent a lifetime building. He watched as Santa stumbled for words, offered her a candy cane, and gently moved her along. The girl took her treat, nodding politely, and stepped away. Her small shoulders squared, as if bracing for another disappointment. She turned and found herself looking straight at Ethan. For a heartbeat, she stared at him with eyes that asked nothing, expected nothing, and yet somehow accused him all the same. He could have looked away. He could have pretended she was invisible, like everyone else seemed to do. Instead, Ethan hesitated. The line behind the girl moved on. Santa's ho-ho-ho resumed, the mall returned to its orchestrated cheer, but Ethan stood rooted to the spot, watching her retreat to the edge of the crowd, rabbit pressed tight to her chest, candy cane unopened. He realized then that she wasn't waiting for a miracle. She was waiting for someone to see her. And before he knew why, Ethan followed. Ethan Harrington had made a career out of walking away. Meetings, relationships, entire chapters of his life. He knew when to let go, when to draw a line under a story and move on. That was survival, he told himself. That was business. But as he watched the little girl disappear into the edge of the Christmas crowd, something inside him refused to settle. She moved like someone who'd learned how to take up less space, to slip between people unnoticed, to expect nothing. The world swirled around her, a blizzard of red coats and laughter, and the soft tinkle of Christmas music piped from hidden speakers. She did not belong to any of it, not really. She walked with her head down, her feet scuffing the tiles, rabbit clutched so tight it seemed almost a part of her. Ethan lingered at the edge of the event, the sharp taste of guilt surprising him. It was absurd. She was just a child, a stranger, not his responsibility. And yet he couldn't stop watching, as if she'd stolen something from him and he was trying to remember what it was. He told himself he would only watch for a moment. Just to make sure she wasn't lost, that someone, anyone, was coming for her. But the longer he watched, the more obvious it became that she was alone. Parents collected their children, laughing and corralling them toward the exit. Santa's helpers reset the tinsel and posed for the last photos of the night. The crowd thinned, families trailing holiday bags and new memories. But the girl remained, a small shadow at the margin of the Christmas spectacle. For a time, she simply stood. She studied the candy cane Santa had given her, turning it over and over in her hands as if trying to puzzle out its meaning. Then, as the line finally vanished and the last of the Christmas music faded, she made her way to a quiet bench beneath a plastic wreath. There, she sat, hugging her knees to her chest. The mall around her changed shape, noise giving way to silence, bright lights casting longer, lonelier shadows. Ethan's phone buzzed, texts from his assistant, reminders, an alert that his car was waiting. He didn't respond. Instead, he found himself drifting closer, unable to shake the feeling that if he left now, the night would stay with him forever. He stopped a few steps away, uncertain. How did you approach a child you'd never met, in a world where trust was currency and he'd long ago bankrupted his own? For all his money, all his practiced charm, he found himself lost for words. The girl noticed him, finally. She looked up, cautious but not afraid, more the look of someone who expects to be told to move along, to make herself invisible again. Up close, he saw the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hair curled unevenly over her ears, the small scratch across her cheek. She could have been anyone's daughter, he thought. She could have been his. He cleared his throat. "Hey," he managed, voice lower and softer than he intended. "Are you waiting for someone?" She shook her head, not quite meeting his gaze. "No." Ethan hesitated, searching her face for some sign of what to do next. She didn't seem frightened, just weary, as if she'd run out of ways to pretend she was okay. He tried again. "Do you live around here?" She shrugged, the movement making her seem even smaller. "We used to. Not anymore." Her words landed like a stone. Ethan looked away, embarrassed by his own discomfort. He wondered how many people had walked past her tonight, each telling themselves it wasn't their problem. He wondered how many times he'd done the same. He sat down on the far end of the bench, leaving a wide, safe distance between them. The mall was nearly empty now, the world outside gone blue with cold. He could hear the faint scrape of a cleaning crew, the soft shush of automatic doors. The holiday had become something quieter. Just the two of them in the brittle afterglow of wishes unmet. For a while, neither spoke. Ethan found himself remembering a different Christmas, years ago, in a different city, before his first million, before the years hardened him into someone who didn't believe in luck. He remembered waiting for his own father to come home, the clock ticking past midnight, the certainty in his mother's eyes fading with each passing hour. He remembered wishing, the desperate, magical kind, the kind that never came true. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. The girl unwrapped her candy cane and took a small, careful bite. She studied the pattern of red and white, her brow furrowed as if the answer to her life was hidden in its stripes. Ethan watched her, trying to recall the last time he'd simply sat beside another person without a goal, without an angle. He found it oddly peaceful, in a way that unsettled him. "Do you want me to call someone?" he asked quietly. "A family member? A friend?" She shook her head again. "It's just me." A pause. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. "My mom, she's gone. I thought if I told Santa maybe." She broke off, staring at her shoes. Ethan's chest tightened. He'd heard so many sad stories over the years, usually from a safe distance, through a newsfeed or a quarterly report. They were always someone else's problem, a statistic, a headline. But this was just a girl on a bench with a broken wish. "I'm sorry," he said, and for once, the words felt real. She glanced at him, surprised by his honesty. "It's okay. I know he can't really help. I just wanted to say it out loud." The words hung between them, gentle and heavy. The mall lights dimmed by degrees, signaling closing time. Somewhere in the distance, an announcement echoed over the intercom: "The mall will close in 15 minutes. Please make your way to the exits. The girl didn't move. Ethan hesitated, caught between the life he knew and the one unfolding in front of him. He could leave now, say he'd done his part. But something in the girl's quiet courage, her refusal to ask for anything, pinned him to the spot. He tried to imagine what his mother would have wanted someone to do, all those years ago, when she'd run out of hope and he'd been too young to understand why. "Are you hungry?" he asked finally. She looked up, wary, as if the question was a trick. "A little." Ethan nodded, standing. "Come on. Let's find somewhere that's still open." She rose cautiously, still clutching her rabbit, eyes darting from him to the exit, judging the distance. He kept his hands in his pockets, careful not to spook her, moving slowly, letting her set the pace. They walked in silence past shuttered storefronts, the mall now echoing with their footsteps. Ethan scanned for a food court, a vending machine, anything. At last, he spotted a small bakery at the end of the hall, lights still on, a tired woman sweeping behind the counter. He bought 2 pastries and a cup of hot chocolate, sliding one across the table to the girl. She eyed the treat, then took a cautious bite. He watched as the tension in her shoulders eased, just a little. "My name's Ethan," he offered. The girl nodded, silent for a moment. "Sophie." He smiled, the name fitting her in a way he couldn't explain. They ate in companionable silence, the warmth of the food settling something deep inside both of them. Ethan found himself talking, softly, about nothing in particular. The taste of his mother's cinnamon rolls, the way snow used to look from his childhood window, the stray cat he once rescued from a storm. Sophie listened, eyes half-lidded, rabbit nestled in her lap. After a while, she began to talk too. She spoke of a motel room with peeling wallpaper, of the songs her mom used to sing when they were scared, of the time she saw a shooting star but forgot to make a wish. Her voice was steady, not asking for pity, just sharing the facts of her life as if they were weather reports. Ethan realized she was braver than most adults he knew. Braver, perhaps, than he was. When they finished, he asked gently, "Where are you staying tonight?" Sophie shrugged, brushing sugar from her fingers. "I'll find someplace." The matter-of-factness of her answer stunned him. He searched for a solution, for the right thing to say, but nothing seemed big enough for the problem in front of him. The bakery owner called over, "We're closing up, hon. Need to get home before the snow really comes down." Ethan glanced at the window. Snowflakes drifted past the glass, growing thicker by the minute. The world outside had become inhospitable, another barrier for a child with nowhere to go. He took a breath. "You could stay at my hotel, just for tonight," he said carefully, not wanting to frighten her. "It's not far. There's extra rooms. Warm beds. You don't have to decide now." Sophie studied him, measuring his words, her expression guarded but curious. She seemed to understand he was not offering charity or pity, just shelter, for a night when the world had no mercy to spare. After a long pause, she nodded. "Okay. Just for tonight." Relief swept through him, sharper than he expected. They walked together into the night, the snow muffling their steps, 2 strangers linked by loneliness and the quiet hope that tomorrow might offer something better. And as Ethan led Sophie through the empty parking lot, he realized he was no longer certain who was rescuing whom. The night had turned colder while they sat in the bakery, the kind of deepening chill that works its way through bone and memory. Snow drifted in swirling sheets across the parking lot, blanketing tire tracks, softening sharp edges. Christmas lights reflected off the growing whiteness, casting little colored halos on the ground. For a moment, the world outside seemed to pause, every sound muffled, every shape gentled by frost. Ethan and Sophie stepped out beneath the awning, the automatic doors hissing closed behind them. He kept his hands visible, moving with the careful patience of someone who knew not to rush a frightened animal, or a wounded child. Sophie, for her part, hugged her thin coat tighter, the sleeves nearly covering her fingers, the rabbit's ear trailing against her wrist. She kept a step behind, always within arm's reach of escape. They walked in silence toward the parking lot, the quiet between them less awkward than before. Ethan glanced sideways, uncertain whether to offer comfort or just keep steady pace. He saw now that Sophie's hair was tangled from the hood of her coat, that her shoes were more slipper than sneaker, the soles nearly gone. Her face was half hidden behind her collar, but her eyes missed nothing, tracking every movement, every light, every shadow. He wondered how long she had lived this way, alert, watchful, never quite letting her guard fall. The car was waiting at the curb, engine idling, snow starting to gather along the windshield. Ethan's driver, Michael, got out quickly, brushing the flakes from his coat, surprise flickering across his face as he registered the small, silent girl beside his boss. "Evening, sir. Is everything all right?" Michael's tone was careful, deferential, but Ethan could hear the unspoken question. He simply nodded, opening the back door himself. "Hop in, Sophie. It's warm inside." He gestured for her to enter first, settling into the opposite seat and leaving as much space as the plush interior allowed. She slid in hesitantly, rabbit on her lap, eyes flicking between the men. Michael started to speak, then thought better of it, turning up the heat and glancing at Ethan in the rearview mirror. For a while, the only sound was the thrum of the engine and the faint whir of the heater. Ethan glanced down at his phone, the screen lighting up with missed calls and calendar reminders. None of it mattered. He turned it face down, choosing instead to watch the city drift by outside, storefronts shuttered and glowing in the blue light of snow. Sophie pressed her forehead to the window, watching as they left the mall behind, streetlights winking out one by one. The hotel was only a few miles away, but the drive felt longer, the world shrinking down to the quiet space inside the car. Sophie said nothing, but Ethan could feel her relax by degrees, the warmth of the heater chasing the cold from her fingers. She traced little shapes in the condensation on the glass, her breath leaving ghostly marks that faded quickly. At last, the car slid to a halt beneath the hotel's canopy, lights glowing gold against the storm. The doorman stepped forward, umbrella ready, but Ethan waved him off, opening the door and stepping out first. He turned, offering a hand, not expecting her to take it, just leaving it open. Sophie regarded him for a moment, then slid out on her own, rabbit pressed tight, her feet crunching in the new snow. She hesitated, peering up at the hotel's glass doors, the swirling marble lobby beyond. It was another world, warm, bright, expensive. A world built for people with reservations and credit cards, not for girls who'd learned to disappear. Ethan saw the uncertainty in her stance, the way she lingered at the edge as if waiting to be stopped. He nodded at Michael, who tipped his hat and drove away, leaving them in the hush of falling snow. "Come on," Ethan said gently. "It's just a place to sleep. No one's going to ask questions." He led her inside, nodding at the desk staff, who instantly straightened at his arrival, eyes widening at the sight of Sophie. Ethan kept his voice low, issuing quiet instructions. "Suite on the top floor. No paperwork. Make sure there's hot food sent up." The manager nodded, understanding without asking for details. The elevator doors slid open, and they rode up in silence. Sophie watched the numbers light up, her reflection wavering in the polished chrome. Ethan glanced at her, seeing the way she held herself, braced but unbroken. The suite was large, bright, and far too grand for comfort. Ethan switched on the lights, illuminating a living room furnished in soft creams and grays, a thick rug underfoot, windows looking out over the city. Snow streaked the glass, blurring the skyline into a watercolor wash. Sophie hovered near the doorway, not quite entering. He gestured toward the couch. "You can sit anywhere you like. There's food coming, hot chocolate too, if you want it." She stepped forward, leaving a trail of wet footprints, her rabbit dangling by one arm. She didn't speak, but her eyes scanned everything. The exits, the distance to the door, the way the curtains were half drawn. Ethan recognized the look. He'd seen it in boardrooms, in shelters, in the mirror on his worst days, the instinct to map escape routes, to never get too comfortable. He crossed to a cabinet, pulling out a spare blanket and a soft hotel robe. "You can change if you want. The bathroom's right there. Take your time." He placed them on the arm of the couch, stepping back to give her space. Sophie nodded, clutching her things and disappearing behind the bathroom door. Ethan exhaled slowly, tension draining from his shoulders as he heard water running. At first just a trickle, then a little stronger. He found himself pacing, unsure what to do with his hands, his mind racing through every possible misstep. Room service arrived: soup, grilled cheese, fruit, cocoa with extra marshmallows. The staff lingered at the door, curious, but he waved them off with a tip and a look that brooked no argument. Sophie re-emerged in the robe, her hair damp, face scrubbed clean. She looked impossibly young and impossibly tired, the robe swallowing her small frame. She glanced at the food, hunger warring with suspicion. Ethan poured her a mug of cocoa, the steam curling in the air. She sat carefully at the table, eating with slow, measured bites, never taking more than half of anything, as if afraid someone might come and take it away. He let her eat in peace, fixing himself a plate but barely touching it, watching her more than his own meal. For a while, neither spoke. The city outside was lost in snow, traffic reduced to a few lonely headlights. The suite, which always felt too big, now felt oddly full. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "How long have you been on your own?" Sophie didn't answer right away. She stared into her cocoa, watching the marshmallows melt. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "Since last month. My mom, she went out to find work. She said she'd be back, but she didn't come." Ethan nodded, his own chest tight. "Have you talked to anyone? Teachers? Neighbors?" She shook her head. "We moved a lot. Sometimes people help, but then they ask questions. They want to call someone. I don't want to go into foster care." He understood, more than he cared to admit. The fear of losing even what little you have. The need to keep moving, to keep secrets, because sometimes the world's version of help felt more like being swept away. He kept his voice gentle. "You're safe here. Just for tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure something out. Together." Sophie glanced up, as if searching his face for signs of deception. She must have found what she needed, because she nodded, then finished her cocoa in a single, brave gulp. After dinner, Ethan showed her to the guest room, bigger than any apartment he'd ever lived in as a boy, with sheets turned down and a view of the snow-laden city. He set the spare blanket on the end of the bed and left the bathroom light on, just in case. Sophie crawled under the covers, rabbit in her arms, hair still damp from her shower. She looked impossibly small against the vastness of the bed. For a moment, Ethan hovered in the doorway, unsure if she'd want him to stay. "Thank you," she said quietly, voice already blurred by exhaustion. He nodded. "Good night, Sophie. I'll be right outside if you need anything." He closed the door gently, leaving it open just a crack. In the quiet that followed, Ethan settled on the couch, staring at the city lights through the snow. The suite felt different now, less like a fortress, more like a refuge. He felt something old and brittle shift inside his chest. He thought of his own mother, singing carols in a too-cold apartment, and wondered if she'd ever felt this kind of hope, or this kind of helplessness. For a long time, Ethan didn't sleep. He listened for sounds from the guest room, half expecting Sophie to vanish, half hoping she'd dream without fear. The city outside slowed, lights blinking out one by one. Snow kept falling, softening the night. And for the first time in years, Ethan Harrington let himself wait. Not for business, not for news, but for the quiet miracle of a child's safe sleep. In the morning, nothing would be the same. Ethan hadn't really slept. He drifted in and out, always listening for the soft pad of footsteps or the creak of a door, the instinct of someone who'd learned too late how easy it is to lose what matters most. Every time he started to doze, a stray noise from the city or a sudden gust of wind against the glass jolted him back to awareness. For hours he lay there, watching the snow pile up on the window ledge, the city lights below smeared into watercolor blurs, wondering if Sophie was warm enough, if she was still there. In the end, it wasn't the dawn that woke him but the faint, careful sound of someone moving in the kitchen. Ethan sat up, the blanket pooling around his waist, the aches in his neck and back reminders of a night spent keeping vigil. He glanced at his phone, just after 6 a.m., the sky outside still the color of slate. He moved quietly, unwilling to startle Sophie. The kitchen was awash in early blue light. She stood at the counter, the hotel robe trailing nearly to her ankles, rabbit tucked in the crook of her arm. She was staring at the coffee machine, brow furrowed, one small hand hovering over the controls as if deciphering a secret code. "Morning," Ethan said softly, so she wouldn't jump. Sophie flinched anyway, then schooled her face to calm. "Sorry. I didn't mean, I just wanted some water." Ethan smiled, gentle. "You're fine. Here, let me." He filled a glass, passed it over, then set about making coffee, an old ritual that helped him steady his nerves, though this morning he found his hands unaccountably clumsy. Sophie sipped her water, watching him, eyes darting around the bright, unfamiliar kitchen. "I didn't take anything. I just didn't want to sleep anymore." "I know." He paused, searching for words. "You don't have to explain." They stood in silence, Ethan spooning coffee grounds, Sophie tracing a pattern in the condensation on her glass. Her hair stuck up in odd angles, a cowlick she hadn't noticed, and for the first time she looked more like a child than a shadow. He slid a plate of fruit across the counter. "Hungry?" She nodded, but took only a single grape, holding it in her palm as if weighing it before eating. Ethan wanted to ask questions, about her mother, about where she'd been, what she remembered, but he forced himself to wait. He understood something about trust. How easily it was broken, how slowly it returned. Instead, he talked about the snow, about the view from the top floor, about the funny little bird he'd seen on the balcony once, shivering in the cold but singing anyway. Sophie listened, the lines in her brow smoothing a little. She asked about the bird, about what it had eaten, about whether it came back. He answered as best he could, relieved to find a subject safe from sorrow. Breakfast arrived, eggs, toast, little golden pancakes, a silver pitcher of syrup. Sophie stared at the spread, hunger and suspicion warring on her face. Ethan poured syrup on his own pancakes first, as if to prove it was safe. Only then did she eat, slow at first, then faster, as if realizing she would not be stopped. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her sleeve, then, after a moment's hesitation, used the napkin instead. The gesture struck Ethan as unbearably dignified, a reminder of all the small, invisible ways children survive hard times. After breakfast, Ethan gave her the remote and showed her how to turn on the television. Cartoons, holiday movies, nothing too loud or bright. She sat cross-legged on the couch, Rabbit propped beside her, eyes growing heavy. Ethan stepped onto the balcony, phone in hand, exhaling a long breath into the cold air. He called his assistant, Paul, leaving a brief message. "Cancel my meetings. I'll be out for the day. And, Paul, find out if there are any missing person reports for a girl named Sophie in the last month." Quietly. He hung up before Paul could call back, not ready to answer questions he barely understood himself. Inside, Sophie had drifted sideways, head resting against the arm of the couch, television flickering across her closed eyelids. She looked impossibly small, lost in the ocean of cushions, her rabbit cradled like a secret. Ethan watched her sleep for a long moment, an ache blooming in his chest. He wondered what he was doing, what lines he was crossing. He'd built his life on caution, on never letting himself get swept up in stories that didn't belong to him. But Sophie's story had already broken through every defense he had. The morning unfolded slowly. Ethan answered emails with half his attention, his gaze always drifting back to the girl on his couch. At some point, she woke, blinking against the daylight. She watched the city for a while, then asked, "Do you think my mom's looking for me?" The question gutted him. He sat beside her, not too close. "I think she's trying," he said honestly. "Sometimes the world makes it hard, but I think she wants to find you." Sophie nodded, picking at a loose thread on the rabbit's ear. "She said if we ever got lost, I should find the biggest Christmas tree and wait. She said Santa finds kids like me." Ethan smiled, sad and real. "Santa finds a lot of people in strange places." She looked at him, serious. "Do you believe in Santa?" He almost lied, to make her feel better, but something in her gaze made him tell the truth. "I used to. Now, I'm not sure. Maybe I want to again." Sophie considered that, her mouth twisting. "I think he's just someone who listens when you're lonely." Ethan had no answer to that. He watched as she stood, wandering to the window, her small hands pressed to the glass. "Do you want to call anyone?" he asked gently. "We don't have to talk about foster care, I promise. Just, if there's anyone at all, I can help." She shook her head. "Everyone we know is gone, or busy, or they don't care." She looked down, voice barely a whisper. "It's always just been me and her." Ethan felt a familiar anger, not at Sophie, but at the world that made children so practiced at disappointment. He tried to imagine his own mother in Sophie's place, tried to imagine what it would take to vanish so thoroughly from the world's notice. He made another call, this one to a contact at a city shelter. "Hypothetically," he began, "if a child showed up alone, is there a way to get help without the system swallowing her whole?" The woman on the other end was blunt. "Not really, Ethan. But I can check around, see if anyone's heard about a missing girl. I'll keep it quiet." He thanked her, heart sinking. Lunch came and went. Sophie ate more this time, relaxing by slow degrees, but she never let herself linger at the table. She moved like someone used to having to leave in a hurry. In the afternoon, Ethan suggested a walk in the hotel's rooftop garden, just a bit of fresh air, something to clear the cobwebs. Sophie agreed, but only if the rabbit could come too. The rooftop was silent beneath a heavy white sky, snow blanketing the benches and the dormant rose bushes. Sophie trudged alongside Ethan, boots borrowed from housekeeping, her steps slow but steady. She looked up at the sky, catching snowflakes on her tongue, and for a moment she laughed. Clear, surprised, delighted. The sound startled Ethan. He realized he hadn't heard a child's laughter in his hotel in years. They walked the perimeter, Sophie asking questions about the city, about the tallest buildings, about whether the people in the apartments below ever saw the stars. Ethan answered as best he could, inventing names for constellations, sharing old stories from his childhood. Each answer drew Sophie out, piece by piece, her guard slipping a little further. By the time they returned to the suite, her cheeks were pink, her hair damp from melting snow. She changed back into the robe, curling up in the big chair with a mug of cocoa, rabbit drying by the radiator. As evening approached, Ethan found himself pacing. He knew this could not go on forever. One night, maybe two, but soon someone would come looking, or someone would notice. Sophie, for all her quiet resilience, was still just a child, one small voice in a city that rarely listened. He sat across from her, voice gentle. "If you want, we can look for your mom together. I have friends who can help. But only if you want. No one will make you do anything." Sophie studied him, her eyes old and wary. "People always say they want to help. But they don't stay. Or they promise things they can't keep." Ethan nodded, accepting the truth of that. "I can't promise anything, Sophie. But I can promise I won't disappear. Not until you say so." She weighed that, then gave the smallest nod. That night, Ethan ordered her favorite foods, pizza, ice cream, the kinds of things that made the world seem kinder. They watched a movie, the sound turned low. Sophie fell asleep halfway through, rabbit tucked beneath her chin, mouth stained with chocolate. Ethan carried her to the guest room, covering her with an extra blanket. He paused in the doorway, watching her breathe, the steady rise and fall of someone finally safe enough to sleep. The city outside glimmered, the storm passing, the world just a little brighter. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the faint stirrings of hope, the sense that even broken things could be made whole, that even the coldest night could end in warmth. He left the door cracked, the hallway light spilling in, and settled on the couch, letting himself believe, if only for tonight, that miracles might be possible after all. That night, the hotel felt different. Ethan lay on the couch with the city's restless light flickering against the ceiling, listening to the quiet beyond the guest room door. He had always imagined silence as emptiness, a blank space between obligations, but now it felt like a pause, an uncertain, hopeful hush. Sophie's soft breathing was the anchor, the proof that for one night at least, the world was not as hard as he'd always believed. Sleep, when it finally came, was shallow and strange. He dreamed of his mother, younger, smiling, her hands dusted with flour, her hair pulled back in a way he hadn't remembered in years. She was singing softly, some half-forgotten lullaby, the words tumbling like snowflakes. In the dream, he was small again, clutching the edge of the kitchen table, waiting for her to look up and notice him. He awoke with tears in his eyes, embarrassed by how real it felt, by how much he still missed her. The morning was bright with a new dusting of snow, the city below clean and sharp as a postcard. For a long time, Ethan lay listening for sounds, Sophie stirring, the rustle of sheets, the creak of a door. When at last he heard her moving, he sat up quickly, smoothing his hair, checking his phone more out of habit than need. Paul had left 2 messages, one asking for instructions about the day's appointments, the other just a single line, "No missing person matches for a Sophie. Should I widen the search?" Ethan texted back, "Yes," quietly. "Try first names only, maybe even nicknames. No press. No police yet." He paused before sending, uneasy about the web he might be weaving. He had promised Sophie not to push her into a system that wouldn't keep her safe, but doing nothing was not an option. There had to be a way to help without making things worse. He found Sophie standing by the window, wrapped in the robe, rabbit tucked beneath her arm. She watched the city in silence, her face set in an expression he was learning to read, a mix of longing and calculation, as if she were measuring the distance between herself and everything she wanted. "Good morning," he said gently. She nodded, not quite turning from the glass. "It snowed again." It did. Ethan moved to stand beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. "It's supposed to get sunny later. We could go out, if you want. Maybe get something warm to eat, see the city." Sophie's nose wrinkled. "Will there be a lot of people?" "Probably. But we can find a quiet spot. Or stay here, if you prefer." She shrugged, uncertain, then glanced at him sidelong. "You don't have to stay with me. I know you're busy." The words pricked at him, but he shook his head. "Not today. I cancelled everything. Sometimes the world can wait." That earned him the barest hint of a smile, fleeting and private. Breakfast was quieter than before. Sophie ate in small, careful bites, her eyes always tracking the room, never letting her guard down for long. Ethan made a point to eat with her, even when he wasn't hungry. He remembered his mother once telling him, "Children notice what you do more than what you say." He wondered what Sophie noticed, what judgments she was storing away behind those steady eyes. After breakfast, she wandered through the suite, examining everything with the casual detachment of someone who never expected to stay anywhere long. She picked up a book from the shelf, running her fingers over the spine, then set it down again. She looked at the painting above the fireplace, a stormy seascape Ethan had chosen for its ambiguity, and asked, "Do you like the ocean?" He hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "I haven't been in years. My mother loved it, though. She used to say the waves made her feel small, but safe." Sophie considered this, then nodded. "My mom liked rivers. She said you could always find your way by the water." The simplicity of her answer struck him. He realized how little he knew of her world, of the paths she and her mother had walked, of the codes and signals that meant safety or danger, stay or go. He tried, gently, to ask more. "Do you remember your last address? Or a school you went to? Anything that might help us find your mom?" Sophie's face shuttered. She shook her head, lips pressed thin. "We moved too much. I don't remember." She just said, "If we get lost, look for the biggest Christmas tree, and wait." Ethan heard the echo of desperation in that memory, a mother's attempt to give her daughter hope, a rule to follow if the world turned unfriendly. He wondered what it cost a parent to teach a child to wait and survive instead of to reach out and trust. He let the subject drop. Instead, they spent the morning quietly, Ethan on his laptop, half-heartedly checking emails, Sophie curled on the couch with the rabbit, drawing on the hotel notepad with a borrowed pen. She didn't ask for anything, didn't demand attention. She was content, or at least practiced at appearing so. Around noon, Ethan's phone buzzed, a message from his shelter contact. No one's reported a missing girl with that name. No new cases matching her description. I'll keep looking. Let me know if anything changes. He stared at the message, frustrated by the dead end. How could a child go missing and no one notice? How many Sophies were out there, waiting, unseen, unheard? He ordered lunch, opting for comfort food, tomato soup, grilled cheese, apple slices. Sophie ate more than usual, her cheeks flushed, her eyes brighter. Afterward, she shyly offered him her drawing, a crooked Christmas tree, covered in stars, with two stick figures at its base. One had brown hair, the other a messy black mop. Both were holding hands. "It's you and me," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Waiting for Santa." Ethan blinked, the paper trembling in his hands. "Thank you, Sophie. This is the best thing I've gotten in a long time." She shrugged, embarrassed. "It's not very good. It's perfect." He pinned it to the fridge with a hotel magnet, the image brightening the kitchen in a way no designer could have managed. That afternoon, Ethan called Paul again. "Keep searching," he instructed, voice low. "And Paul, see if there's anyone in the city helping missing parents, not just kids. Maybe Sophie's mom is out there looking, just as lost." Paul agreed, promising to be discreet. The rest of the day passed quietly. They watched more movies, played a half-hearted game of cards. At one point, Sophie fell asleep mid-sentence, head lolling against the couch cushion. Ethan draped a blanket over her, then sat beside her, the weight of responsibility and uncertainty pressing on his chest. As dusk fell, a strange hush settled over the suite, a fragile peace, the kind that comes from knowing the outside world can wait until morning. Sophie woke in time for dinner, eating slowly, her appetite returning. She asked Ethan about his childhood, about the holidays he remembered, about what it was like to be rich. He answered honestly, telling her about the small apartments, the years without gifts, the Christmases that were just another day to get through. She listened intently, sometimes smiling, sometimes looking away when the sadness crept too close. When he asked about her favorite holiday, she said, "I like Christmas lights. Even when we couldn't have a tree, we'd find a street with lots of lights and walk until we weren't cold anymore." That night, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan stood at the window, looking out over the snowy city. He thought of all the lights below, apartments, houses, empty offices, each one a world unto itself, each one with its own Sophies, its own stories of hope and waiting. He felt the old ache return, the sense of having spent his life running from loneliness instead of facing it. But now, with a little girl asleep in the next room and a hand-drawn tree on his fridge, he wondered if there was another way forward. He made one last call, this one to the night manager. "If anyone comes looking for a child, anyone who seems lost or desperate, call me. Day or night. No questions asked." He hung up, heart pounding, unsure whether he was building a bridge or just another wall. As he turned off the lights and settled on the couch, Ethan let himself hope that tomorrow might bring answers. That somewhere out in the city, someone was searching for Sophie with the same stubborn hope. And for the first time in a long time, as sleep claimed him, Ethan dreamed not of loss, but of small miracles waiting to be found. For the first time in months, Ethan woke feeling lighter, as if something inside him had shifted during the night. He lay there for a moment, watching the gray dawn slide through the tall windows, listening to the faint city sounds below. Somewhere in the building, a vacuum hummed, a distant reminder that the world was waking up and moving forward, whether he was ready or not. He stretched, joints stiff from another night on the couch, and found himself glancing at the fridge, where Sophie's drawing, the crooked Christmas tree, two figures beneath a sky of childish stars, still greeted him with stubborn optimism. He smiled, almost in spite of himself. The hotel suite was quiet. Too quiet. For a heartbeat, panic flared. What if she'd left? What if, after all their careful steps toward trust, Sophie had slipped out into the city before he could help? He moved quickly, crossing to the guest room, only to find her curled in bed, rabbit tucked under her chin, hair wild on the pillow. Her mouth twitched in a half-dream, and Ethan exhaled, the tension draining from his shoulders. He let her sleep, making coffee and checking messages. There was one from Paul, sent just before dawn. No news on missing parents matching Sophie's story. Checked hospitals, shelters, Police. Nothing. Quietly posted a query through back channels. We'll keep searching. Hang in there, boss. Another from his shelter contact. Still nothing on Sophie. You're doing the right thing. Don't let her vanish. Ethan sipped his coffee, staring out over the snow-bright city, wondering if he'd ever felt so helpless. He'd built fortunes out of solving problems. He was used to making things happen, writing a check, calling a favor, moving mountains when necessary. But all his resources felt small against the puzzle of a missing mother and a girl who trusted almost no one. He heard the door creak. Sophie shuffled out, blinking sleep from her eyes, clutching her rabbit. She hovered near the threshold, not quite entering the light, as if testing the world for danger before stepping into it. Morning, Ethan offered, voice gentle. Sophie nodded, eyes going straight to the fridge, searching for her drawing. When she saw it was still there, pinned in place, she relaxed by a fraction. I thought you'd take it down. He shook his head. It's my favorite thing in here. A ghost of a smile flickered across her face. She accepted a mug of cocoa, warming her hands. Breakfast was quiet. Eggs, toast, more fruit. Sophie ate with a little more confidence, and Ethan found himself telling her about the hotel's history, the old elevator that sometimes squeaked, the secret rooms he'd found when renovating the building. She asked questions about everything: why some people lived at the hotel, what the city looked like from the roof at night, if he ever got bored being in charge. He answered as honestly as he could, feeling the distance between them shrink, thread by thread. After breakfast, Ethan brought out a blank notebook and a pack of colored pencils, a gift, left at the door by the staff with a note, for Sophie. Merry Christmas. He slid it across the table. If you want to draw more, you can. Or write. Or just scribble. Sophie's face lit up, surprise overtaking caution. Thank you. She opened the notebook carefully, as if afraid the pages might vanish if she handled them too quickly. She drew in silence, every so often glancing up to check that he was still there, that the world had not changed while she looked away. As the morning stretched on, Ethan made calls, quiet inquiries to lawyers, city contacts, anyone who might know how to navigate a missing person search without triggering a cascade of bureaucracy that would sweep Sophie away. He asked about safe shelters, women's clinics, even old friends in social work. The answers were always the same: we'll look, but these cases vanish all the time. The system isn't made for girls like her. He watched Sophie draw a new picture, this time of a rabbit with a red scarf, standing on a snowy street beneath blinking Christmas lights. She added a second figure, a tall man in a suit, holding an umbrella over the rabbit's head. When she finished, she pushed the drawing toward Ethan, almost shyly. This one's you. He swallowed, surprised by how much it mattered. I love it, he said. Thank you, Sophie. They went for a walk that afternoon, bundled in coats and scarves borrowed from Lost and Found. The snow had stopped, leaving the sidewalks slick and shining. Sophie walked beside Ethan, one hand gripping his sleeve whenever the street grew busy, the other clutching her rabbit. They stopped at a bakery for pastries, then wandered the side streets, talking about nothing and everything. Which windows looked the warmest, whether the city would ever run out of snow, what she would do if she could have any wish. She hesitated at that last question, scuffing her boot against a snowbank. I'd find my mom, she said at last. And maybe I'd have a home that didn't move all the time. A place where the neighbors knew my name. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her wish, how small and enormous it was all at once. He remembered the first time he'd signed a lease in his own name, the sense of wonder and fear that he could stay, that no one would move him on. Those are good wishes, he told her. Sometimes you have to say them out loud, just in case someone's listening. Sophie considered this. Like Santa. He laughed softly. Maybe. Or maybe just people who care. They returned to the hotel, cheeks flushed, arms full of bakery treats. Sophie seemed lighter now, the day's simple pleasures loosening her fear for a moment. She drew more pictures, her rabbit in different hats, Ethan as a snowman, a hotel room with windows wide open to the stars. In the late afternoon, Ethan's phone buzzed. Paul again, Got a call from a woman at a church shelter on the other side of town. She heard someone's been looking for a missing mom. Description's vague, but woman said she lost her daughter in a crowd days ago, can't find her. Refuses to call police. Name not given. Want me to follow up. Ethan's heart hammered. He looked at Sophie, intent on her drawing, then typed quickly. Get a description. Ask for a name. See if she remembers any details. Places, routines, anything. I'll wait. He tried not to show his anxiety, sitting with Sophie as she told him about her favorite cartoon and how her mom once made soup out of potatoes and nothing else, but it tasted like a feast. He listened, offering small stories of his own, until at last his phone buzzed again. Woman matches general age and appearance. Says her name is Grace. She keeps saying her daughter will find her at the biggest Christmas tree. She's scared, but won't leave the shelter. Wants to wait, just in case. Ethan's hands trembled. He looked at Sophie, suddenly still, watching him, as if she'd sensed something shifting in the air. He smiled, careful not to startle her. Sophie, does the name Grace mean anything to you? Sophie's breath caught. The pencil slipped from her hand. She nodded, eyes wide. That's my mom. Ethan exhaled, the relief so sharp it was almost pain. She's safe. She's looking for you. She's waiting at a church shelter, other side of the city. She said you'd know to find her by the biggest Christmas tree. Sophie's hands flew to her mouth, tears springing up so fast she barely had time to hide them. For a moment, she simply wept, silent and shaking, all the walls falling at once. Ethan knelt beside her, awkward but gentle. We'll go see her, Sophie. Right now, if you want. I promise. She nodded, still sobbing, and for the first time she let him hold her, just for a moment, her small arms clutching him tight, as if she'd never let go. When she finally let him go, she wiped her face, embarrassed. Sorry, she whispered. Don't be, Ethan said, voice rough. I think we both needed that. He called for the car, bundled Sophie in the warmest coat he could find, and held her hand as they rode through the city, past glowing windows and darkened storefronts, across bridges dusted with snow. Sophie stared out the window, silent, her whole body taut with hope and fear. When they reached the church, the shelter staff led them inside. The sanctuary was full of cots and blankets, the air thick with coffee and exhaustion. And there, at the far end, sat a woman in a borrowed coat, her hair pulled back, hands twisting in her lap. Mom! Sophie's cry broke the hush. The woman looked up, hope and disbelief warring on her face. Sophie! She whispered, then ran, nearly falling, gathering her daughter into her arms. They clung together, both weeping, a tangled knot of love and relief that made the whole room pause. Ethan stepped back, letting them have their moment. He watched as Grace checked Sophie from head to toe, kissing her hair, rocking her back and forth. Words tumbled out, apologies, explanations, promises. The pain and relief of too many nights apart, healed in an instant by the simple fact of being together. When Grace finally looked up, her eyes shining, she mouthed, "Thank you," across the room. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. He waited until they were ready, then offered them a ride back to the hotel. Just for a night, he said, until they could figure out what to do next. Grace hesitated, but Sophie's hand in hers was all the answer needed. That night, as the city spun on, Ethan watched the two of them settle into the suite, sharing soup and stories, Sophie's laughter spilling out like sunlight after a long storm. And for the first time, Ethan realized that sometimes, the greatest miracles are the ones that simply bring people home. For the rest of the night, Ethan moved through the hotel suite with the strange caution of someone afraid to break a spell. Sophie and Grace were curled together on the sofa, sharing a blanket and a bowl of soup as if neither could quite believe the other was real. They spoke in low voices, sometimes laughing, sometimes falling silent, sometimes just looking at each other, not touching but never far apart. Their words were half apology, half reassurance, braided with 100 tiny stories that only the two of them could understand. Ethan kept his distance at first. He busied himself with little chores, tidying the kitchen, answering messages from Paul, everything good. / Let me know if you need anything else. He made tea and brought it over, quietly placing the tray on the table, as if afraid a loud sound might shatter what they'd found. He asked Grace if she wanted anything, clothes, toiletries, a phone charger, but she shook her head, still blinking in wonder at the sight of her daughter safe, fed, and warm. Sophie ate hungrily, never out of reach of her mother's hand. Every few minutes, she would reach over and squeeze Grace's fingers, as if to make sure she wouldn't disappear. Grace seemed unable to stop touching Sophie's hair, tucking it behind her ear again and again. Ethan saw how tired Grace looked, her cheeks hollow, eyes ringed with exhaustion, but every time she smiled at her daughter, the years fell away, and she looked young and fierce. When dinner was finished, Sophie rummaged for her notebook and showed Grace her newest drawings. "This one is you," she said, pointing to a smiling stick figure standing under the world's biggest Christmas tree. "I told Santa, but it was really Ethan who found you." Grace's gaze darted to Ethan, and for a moment he saw gratitude so raw it made him look away. "We're both lucky," Grace whispered. "Sometimes the world is kinder than you think." Sophie snuggled against her mother, eyelids drooping. "We don't have to leave tonight, do we?" Grace shook her head. "No, honey. Not tonight. We're safe now." She looked at Ethan, her voice steadier than before. "Thank you. I don't know how to, thank you." Ethan shook his head, uncomfortable with praise. "You don't owe me anything. Just rest. That's what matters now." The suite grew quiet. Sophie fell asleep on the couch, her rabbit wedged under her chin, Grace's hand tangled in her hair. For a while, Grace just sat there, holding her daughter, rocking gently, her eyes fixed on some invisible horizon. Ethan brought her a glass of water, then sat in the armchair across the room, not speaking. He watched as the lines in Grace's face softened, the worry fading with every minute that Sophie breathed steady and unafraid. After a time, Grace spoke, her voice soft. "We didn't always live this way. I had a job, a little apartment. But when Sophie's father left, he wasn't violent, just gone, the bottom dropped out. We tried to keep going. I lost the job, then the apartment, then the friends. Every day, I promised her we'd find something better. Every night, I lied a little more." Ethan listened, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. He thought of his own mother, her silent strength, the way she'd hidden her fear to protect him. He wondered how many women like Grace were out there, trying to hold the world together with nothing but hope and stubbornness. "I've been lucky," Ethan said quietly. "Luckier than I deserve. I never had to worry about losing everything, not really. But I remember what it's like to want something you can't fix." Grace studied him, searching his face for judgment and finding none. "There are good people in this world. But sometimes you can't see them until you're at the very end." He nodded. "I'm glad you saw me. I'm glad Sophie waited." That night, Grace carried Sophie to the guest bed, tucking her in as carefully as if she were made of glass. She came back to the living room, rubbing her eyes, and sat beside Ethan in the hush of the suite. Outside, the city's noise was muffled by snow, the streetlights painting everything silver. Grace sipped her tea, hands trembling just a little. "What happens now?" she asked, voice so quiet it was almost a confession. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "That's up to you. You're welcome to stay here until you figure things out. I have friends who can help. No police, no headlines. There are shelters, jobs, programs for families starting over. I can make calls. Or not. Whatever you want." Grace shook her head, overwhelmed. "You've done enough. I don't want to be a problem for anyone. I just want Sophie to feel safe again. To sleep in a bed and know she can stay until morning." Ethan heard the plea in her voice. Not for charity, but for the simple dignity of being allowed to rest. "You're not a problem. Not to me." She smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You know what she said? When I finally found her at the shelter, she told me she asked Santa for me. That was all she wanted." Ethan's throat tightened. She's braver than most people I know. Grace wiped her eyes, looking toward the bedroom door. I think we both are. We just forget sometimes. He left Grace with a stack of clean towels, extra blankets, and a note with his phone number on the nightstand. For anything. Day or night. Then he stepped out into the corridor, closing the suite door behind him, feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. He wandered the halls of the hotel, pausing by the Christmas tree in the lobby. A few late guests passed by, nodding politely, not knowing that upstairs in a quiet room, a lost mother and daughter were finally safe. Ethan looked up at the blinking lights, remembering the little boy he'd once been, waiting for a miracle that never quite came. He realized, suddenly, that sometimes a miracle wasn't a gift or a wish granted. Sometimes it was just a door left open, a bed made ready, a stranger who stayed when the world had already turned away. He stood there a long time, letting the glow of the tree soak into him, until at last the loneliness that had always haunted the holidays began to loosen its grip. And upstairs, in the hush of a warm room, a mother and daughter slept side by side, safe for the first time in a very long while. Morning in the suite arrived softly, with watery sunlight prying through the curtains and the city below muffled by leftover snow. The world felt hushed, like the pause before a song resumes, hopeful and unsure. Ethan woke early, as he often did, and for a long time lay still, listening. It took a moment to remember, last night had not been a dream. There was no empty silence, no ache of being alone in a home too large for one. Instead, he heard a child's soft voice, the faint squeak of a faucet, the gentle clatter of cups and plates as Sophie and Grace moved quietly around the kitchen. Ethan rose, pulling on a sweater, and found them at the table. Sophie perched on her knees, coloring intently, Grace spooning oatmeal and humming a song under her breath. It was the kind of morning that families everywhere took for granted. The bright ordinariness of it made his throat tighten. Grace smiled up at him, weary but genuine. Morning. I hope you don't mind, I made some oatmeal. The kitchen here, it's nicer than any place I've ever lived. Help yourself, Ethan said, waving away the apology. Anything here is yours. It's just food, better eaten than left for the staff. Sophie held up a new drawing, this one of the hotel itself. Wide windows, a glowing Christmas tree, 3 little stick figures at the door. She'd written, in big block letters, home? Above the doorway. She looked at Ethan, seeking approval, maybe permission. He swallowed, smiling. That's the best one yet. Grace's eyes brimmed, but she blinked away the tears. I never thought we'd get a morning like this again, she said. Thank you. For everything. Ethan shook his head. You don't owe me. I meant what I said. Stay as long as you need. We'll figure things out together. They ate breakfast in a gentle hush, broken only by Sophie's chatter, what she wanted to draw next, how she'd counted the stars outside the window, how safe she'd felt knowing Grace was just across the hall. Grace listened, one hand resting on her daughter's shoulder, as if to ground her to the earth. After breakfast, Ethan called Paul, stepping out onto the balcony so Grace could have some privacy. The city sparkled, the air still sharp with winter. Find out what resources there are for families like Grace and Sophie, Ethan said. Something real, none of the shelters that move people on every 2 days. She needs stability. Maybe a job. School for Sophie. Quiet, no press. Paul, ever efficient, was already ahead of him. I have a contact at the city's family center. Discreet, flexible. I'll call them. And Ethan, good job. This is the kind of story that makes it worth coming to work. Ethan smiled, hanging up, and returned to find Grace looking over a neatly folded sheet of hotel stationery. She'd made a list, possible jobs, a schedule for Sophie, the address of a shelter she'd heard might be safe, if things didn't work out here. He saw the meticulousness in her handwriting, the way she planned for hope and disaster at the same time. You don't have to rush, he said quietly. Nobody's going to knock on the door and tell you to leave. Grace looked up, the relief in her eyes mixed with disbelief. I can't help it. Every place we stayed, there was always a clock ticking. Someone else's rules. Sophie always asked, How long do we get to stay, Mama? She swallowed, pushing the paper aside. It's hard to believe in safe places. Sophie came over, slipping her hand into Ethan's. Will you help us find a real home? Ethan knelt so they were eye to eye. I promise I'll do everything I can. The day passed in small, hopeful steps. Grace showered and borrowed clean clothes from the hotel's donations closet. Sophie helped Ethan bake cookies in the kitchen, both of them laughing as flour dusted their hair and noses. In the afternoon, they ventured onto the rooftop, Sophie racing between the planters, Grace standing at the rail and taking in the city with cautious wonder. Paul called with news. The family center had space, an apartment, not a cot, and a counselor who specialized in helping mothers get back on their feet. No deadlines, no revolving doors. All you have to do is show up, Paul said. And, Ethan? They'd love to have you sponsor the children's library. Just say the word. Ethan grinned. Consider it done. He told Grace the news over dinner, sliding the center's brochure across the table. You'd have your own kitchen. Your own beds. Sophie could go to school down the street. If it feels right, I'll cover whatever isn't free. No strings. No headlines. Just a place to start. Grace read every word, lips moving silently, hands trembling. I don't know what to say. Sophie beamed, looking up at her mother. Can we go, Mama? Can we try? Grace nodded, pressing her hand to her chest. Yes, sweetheart. We can try. That night, as the city outside went gold and silver under the streetlights, Ethan walked the halls of the hotel, feeling something gentle and unfamiliar growing inside him. Not pride, something quieter. Belonging, maybe, or just the sense that, for once, he was part of a story bigger than himself. In the suite, Sophie slept curled around her rabbit, Grace resting at her side. Their breathing filled the rooms, turning empty space into a home. Ethan watched over them for a while, then sat at the kitchen table, looking at Sophie's drawing, home, and decided the answer, at least for now, was yes. The morning of the move arrived quietly. Sunlight leaked into the suite, soft and golden on the walls, promising a rare warmth to the city below. For the first time, Sophie was awake before either adult, already dressed, her rabbit packed carefully in a shopping bag she'd decorated with colored hearts. She darted between rooms, checking every corner, making sure nothing was left behind. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, braiding her daughter's hair, humming a tune that sounded like a lullaby for hope. Ethan moved through the suite with a peculiar ache in his chest. The rooms already felt emptier, echoes lingering in places where laughter and late-night whispers had become part of the walls. He busied himself making breakfast, pancakes and fruit, just as Sophie liked, pausing every so often to watch mother and daughter in the hush of their own rituals. There was something sacred in the smallness of these moments, a holiness he'd never found in boardrooms or charity galas. Paul called just after 9. The family center is ready for them, he said. Counselors waiting. You want me to send a car? Ethan hesitated, then said, No. I'll drive them myself. The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of careful packing and nervous excitement. Grace double-checked Sophie's bag, her own things limited to a few clothes and a single photograph of Sophie as a baby, the corners worn thin from all the places it had traveled. Sophie ran back to the fridge, gently peeling down her home drawing, clutching it to her chest. Can we put it up in the new place? She asked. Ethan smiled, brushing her hair back from her eyes. Of course. It should be the first thing you see every morning. The drive across the city was slow, snow melt streaming along the curbs, sunlight gleaming off the windows of passing cars. Sophie pressed her nose to the glass, narrating every sight. Buses, parks, a bakery with a window full of cakes, while Grace sat quietly, hands clasped tight in her lap, nerves showing through her calm. Ethan felt his own anxiety build. Would the family center feel welcoming? Would Grace find the strength to stay? Would Sophie forgive him if he stepped back from their lives? The center itself was modest, an old brick building tucked onto a tree-lined street, murals on the walls, laughter echoing from the playground out back. A counselor met them at the door, her smile warm and unhurried. "Welcome home, Grace. Welcome, Sophie. We've been waiting for you." They toured the little apartment, 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen with blue tile, sunlight slanting through the blinds. Sophie danced from room to room, flinging open closet doors, testing the creak of the old wooden floor. Grace trailed after her, a little dazed, tears glimmering but not falling. The counselor gave them keys, a welcome basket, and a list of nearby schools. "No curfew. No time limit," she promised. "You can stay as long as you need." Ethan stood back, watching the world he'd nudged into motion finally settle. There was pride, yes, but also a bittersweet ache, a sense of being necessary and unnecessary at the same time. When it was time for him to leave, he knelt so he was level with Sophie. "You're going to do great here. And I'll visit, if you want. Maybe we'll build a bigger Christmas tree for next year." Sophie nodded fiercely, throwing her arms around his neck. "Don't forget us, okay?" "Never," he said, his voice rough. "And you, don't ever stop making wishes, Sophie." He turned to Grace, who hesitated only a moment before pulling him into a hug. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You gave us more than a room. You gave us a chance." Ethan shook his head, swallowing the knot in his throat. "All I did was listen. You did the rest." As he walked out into the bright afternoon, Ethan felt changed in ways he couldn't name. The hotel would feel emptier, yes. The city a little less urgent. But his world had grown larger, gentler, shaped by the 2 lives he'd almost never known. He drove home with the windows down, letting in the chill air, watching the sunlight flicker on the last patches of snow. At a stoplight, he caught his own reflection. Different, somehow, softer at the edges. Later that week, a small envelope arrived at his office. Inside was a drawing. Sophie, Grace, and Ethan standing beneath a giant Christmas tree, all holding hands. Underneath, in bright red crayon, Sophie had written, "Thank you for bringing my mom back. We found our home." Ethan pinned it above his desk, a quiet reminder that the world could still surprise him, that sometimes, miracles were made by ordinary people who simply refused to walk away. And somewhere across the city, in a sunlit apartment filled with laughter, a little girl slept with her mother close beside her, dreaming new dreams, safe at last. Winter returned to the city, slow and soft at first, then sudden and sparkling. Sidewalks filled with bundled children and the warm glow of holiday lights. In the months since that cold December, Sophie and Grace built their lives out of small routines and steady hope. The family center became more than shelter. It became the first place Sophie ever called home with certainty. Grace found part-time work at the neighborhood bakery, her hands steady with dough, her smile contagious. The other mothers there helped her find her footing, sharing advice and laughter over hot coffee. In the afternoons, Sophie came straight from school to the bakery, her cheeks pink from the cold, rabbit tucked under her arm, homework in her backpack. They'd walk home together, arm in arm, their path lit by streetlights and the promise of soup on the stove. The apartment was never fancy. The blue-tiled kitchen always smelled of cinnamon and apples. On the fridge, Sophie's drawing, 3 figures beneath a Christmas tree, held pride of place. She'd added to it over the months, a gingerbread house, a dog she hoped to adopt one day, more stars than she could count. Ethan visited often, never staying too long, always bringing something small. Books for Sophie, flowers for Grace, a new ornament for their Christmas tree. He'd come in after work, letting the laughter and noise of their home settle the edges of his day. Sometimes, he'd sit at the little kitchen table and let Sophie tell him about her teachers, her friends, her plans to build the tallest snowman in the city park. He never stayed for dinner unless asked, but always left with a paper bag of cookies, and always with that feeling. Quiet, unexpected, the sense that something lost had been returned. As December crept back around, the city shimmered with anticipation. Ethan found himself restless at the hotel, the halls quieter, the lobby tree less dazzling than before. He decorated his office with Sophie's drawings, a reminder that the most lasting gifts are often the simplest. On Christmas Eve, he drove to Grace and Sophie's apartment, stopping first at the bakery for a loaf of fresh bread and a peppermint hot chocolate. The building glowed with colored lights, children's laughter spilling out onto the stairwell. When he knocked, Sophie flung open the door, all smiles and excitement. "You made it!" she cried, dragging him inside. "Mama, Ethan's here." Grace greeted him with a hug and a grateful smile. The apartment was warm, the tree in the corner small but radiant, every ornament a story. Sophie had insisted on making paper snowflakes for every neighbor in the building, and a plate of cookies sat ready for Santa, just in case. They ate together, soup and bread, apple slices, cinnamon tea. Sophie told stories about her year, her first real birthday party, the library she loved, the dog she still hoped to convince her mom to adopt. Grace listened, the pride in her eyes impossible to miss. After dinner, Sophie climbed into Ethan's lap with her notebook. "Will you help me write my wish this year?" Ethan smiled, taking the pen. "What's your wish?" Sophie thought for a long moment, then whispered, "I want everyone who's lost to find their way home. Like we did." Ethan wrote it carefully, handing it back to her. Together, they folded the note and tucked it beneath the tree. Night settled softly. Ethan stood to leave, pausing in the doorway. Grace hugged him, her voice thick with emotion. "You changed everything," she said quietly. "I hope you know that." He shook his head, smiling. "You changed me too." Sophie hugged him tightly, whispering, "Come back soon." He promised he would. Walking out into the cold, Ethan looked up at the city, at all the windows glowing against the dark, at all the families gathered close, at the snow falling softly. For the first time in years, he felt not apart from the world, but of it. The ache of old loneliness had softened, replaced by something gentler, more enduring. Not all wishes came true. Not every loss could be undone. But some miracles arrived quietly, on cold nights, in warm kitchens, in the steady brave love of those who never gave up. And somewhere behind him, a little girl fell asleep safe in her mother's arms, dreaming of a world where no one was forgotten, and every heart could find its way home.